Good evening, everyone. Tonight is Monday, August 8th, and we do have a quorum, so I'll call the meeting to order. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Tonight's agenda is approved. Oh, we have to vote, sorry. We will now vote to approve tonight's agenda. All in favor of approving tonight's agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Tonight's agenda is approved. Dr. Stanley, would you please review the agenda for us?
I'd be happy to. So, I just have to say I'm really excited that we are going to give a 3-page report on COVID-19 compared to 38 pages last year. We're going to focus on both board and superintendent goals. Dr. Smazel is going to talk to us about calendar for a couple of years out, so we're excited about that. And then we're bringing forward again the conversation around a travel-based learning experience that was originally planned for 2020. And so Jody and her team is going to bring that forward. And then we have several policies that Board Member Green is going to bring forward for action.
Thank you, Dr. Stanley. First up, we have hearing for members of the public. Pursuant to Board Policy 206, we ask that you do not duplicate information that has been previously presented. If you have a complaint about individual employees, board members, or students in the district, please direct these comments to the appropriate site administrator, the superintendent, or submit them in writing to the board. The board does not respond to or have discussions on any issues presented, but questions raised during presentations will receive follow-up as directed by the board. I'd like to remind all speakers that your presentations are limited to 3 minutes. We should have a display that comes up that has the 3-minute mark on it. Hopefully that will come up, but if not, I will let you know when your 3 minutes are over. And if you could please adhere to that, I would appreciate it. Thank you. First up, we have Isadora Lee. Welcome.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Issa Lee, and I'm a recent graduate of Edina High School. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Edina Asian American Alliance to voice support for the revisions of the Student Handbook and Policy 506, but also to encourage more proactive partnership between key policy shapers from the district and the EPS community in making these edits and revisions, such as the ones up for vote tonight. While efforts to partner with the community through the District Equity Advisory Committee are applauded and appreciated, lost my spot. More preemptive action would have been more impactful and allowed more time for in-depth community input. It's also not clear how community feedback is received. We ask that a mechanism of official follow-up is institutionalized as standard practice so that the community can see the impact or non-impact of their feedback. We really appreciate that transparency there. So thank you for the continuous improvement for students within EPS, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next up is Regina Neville.
Good evening, Dr. Stanley and members of the board. My name is Kelly Street, and I am joined this evening by Regina Neville and representatives of the Edina Anti-Racism Collective. We appreciate this opportunity to thank you for your service to our students and school community. The Anti-Racism Collective works to build a culture of anti-racism through structural change in the place where we live, work, raise our children and grandchildren. We create opportunities for learning, unlearning, speaking out, and taking action. The recent expressions of hate in Edina schools and on district property are deeply harmful to the groups who are targeted and diminish the humanity of our community. We condemn these actions and offer our partnership with all of you to promote healing and to connect with one another, to build a culture of deep listening, shared understanding, and radical acceptance.
New York Times journalist Charles M. Blow has written, "One doesn't have to operate with great malice to do great harm. The absence of empathy and understanding are sufficient. We are here to speak out in order to shatter the complicity of silence. We don't claim to have the answers, but we are here to hold the charge of these harmful actions with you. We offer to join you in the work to hold our community accountable, seek restorative justice, and make corrections as needed. We support district policy to promote equity, and we stand with families in our community to promote the basic values of anti-racism. We invite community members to join our Learning to Lead series beginning in September to engage in discussion to explore personal and collective change. More information is available on our website at ar-collective.org. Thanks once again for allowing this opportunity to speak this evening. Together, we know we can and will create a better community for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you. Oh, thank you. We are now moving on to our consent agenda. Is there anything anyone would like to remove from the consent agenda? Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We will now vote to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The consent agenda has been approved. Moving on to our report, as Dr. Stanley alluded, it's way shorter than last year. So I will turn it over to Dr. Stanley to go over the report and then see if there are any board questions.
All right, thank you. So, Chair Ellenberg, board members, in June and then again in July, actually Anna Sande brought to you a recommendation for moving forward with our COVID-19 protocols. Those recommendations are not changing, and we really have not received additional information from MDH or CDC. We know that there is information out in the news today saying that something may be coming from CDC, and we will certainly update our protocols if we receive additional information. But we will remain in the position of being an optional masking. You'll remember that we moved from strongly recommended masking in June to optional masking. We will continue with our mitigation efforts of having our HEPA filters. We will continue with our mitigation efforts of related to if a student or a staff member tests positive, that they will need to remain home until they've proven that they've tested negative. You'll remember that we have put on pause our staff required testing for those who have not demonstrated that they have completed their vaccination series. And we put the recommendation forward to put that on pause just in case something comes forward this fall and we need to move back into that requirement. One of the areas of concern, we know that the current variants of COVID actually break through vaccination, and what we are really looking at is the impact with staff on absenteeism, and that then impact on our student learning, whether it is being able to be transported to school, or whether it's literally learning in the classroom, or whether it's a shortage of employees in our custodial department. We know that every department makes a difference for our student learning, and so that's why we chose to put that on pause as opposed to fully rescind it. So you had the opportunity to read through the information, and I will pause here for any questions that you might have.
Board members, questions?
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to make a comment, though. I thought this was a great report, and I appreciate how up-to-date you are with what's coming out from the CDC and how your team has been on top of that. So I appreciate that, but I don't have any questions.
No one else? Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Stanley. Appreciate it. And hopefully the year will go smoothly. I'm sure there'll be no bumps from COVID, so. Great. We're going to move on to our discussion items. The first is a discussion on the 2022-2023 board goals. A draft of these board goals were presented and discussed at our board retreat in July, and then discussed again at a work session. Board member and superintendent feedback has been solicited and integrated into this version of the goals. So they're here for today for discussion for board members. If there are any final comments or any feedback before they come for approval for next month's meeting, the September meeting. And then once they're final, Dr. Dr. Stanley, Director Green, and myself are going to sit down and figure out how we can plan for the year, given these are our goals, and how we can implement with our current board meetings and come up with a calendar for the rest of the board. So I'll open it up to questions or comments about the goals. Go ahead, Michael.
I would just say that, I mean, thank you for the revisions that this was updated from our last work session. They're in line with what we had discussed. So I think that was organized well to what we talked about. And hopefully with Dr. Stanley and from our standpoint, that we have really well-articulated goals that we can set out forth and then be able to measure effectively to see how we're doing. So thank you for that effort on the governance side.
I echo what Director Birdman said. This document has really become a living document that makes me excited for what the board will be working on in partnership with Dr. Stanley. The only part that I just wanted to get some clarification on is under Board Goal 3, so on page 60 of the board packet, where it, the second bullet point down where it says key action, where it talks about that creation of a calendar. I know we talked about that, but I don't know, and it kind of came up a little bit tonight at our work session too. Do we want to nuance that a little bit to, instead of creation, or explore? Maybe add the word explore, since I don't know that we had come to a consensus as a board that we were wanting the creation of the calendar or how that would be utilized. And maybe I'm reading it incorrectly, so maybe I need some clarification on that point.
What page was that on, Karen? Can you?
On page 60, under Board Goal 3, the second bullet point down. Yeah.
I think that's in line with our discussion tonight.
Oh, I was going to say the opposite, because, because I saw it as two different things. The creation of the calendar of events was just to, like, where any event that we're invited to, graduation, all that stuff is on there, and that stays tight. But the potential creation of a working plan is where I see that explore that, what that calendar looks like, where you have a little bit more moving parts and what that is. So I saw them as two different things. So I wouldn't say explore, because I think from the discussion we had, I thought that board members were looking forward to having one place with all of the items that could be potential to attend. So that's how I read this.
I think to me, the exploring part was to plan for board appearances at events. So I think the creation of, like, putting events on a calendar is one thing, but then whether or not we were going to actually plan out who was going to attend and actually plan for board appearances.
Right, I read it differently. I read it just that it's a calendar of events to plan, so that board members know when
Right.
they're going to event.
Right, so
Like,
the
who's going to what
actual,
event.
the
So-
actual planning that we said in the work session that we would take back to even see how that would look, I don't see that as being a part of this. So this, to me, was what we talked about, just a document to assist us in our jobs of knowing what's coming. What are events that happen every year? What are events that are happening? What are the date of the
Okay.
events happening this year? That was how I read it.
But if it's
Okay.
not clear, then we should change it.
Right.
That's helpful clarification, yes, because I read it differently. So as long as I know what we're insinuating there, I just,
Yeah.
Oops, sorry.
Hello.
Oh, that's better. Maybe changing it to highlight board or to highlight district events as opposed to plan for. Yeah, board appearance.
That's great.
That works.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions about the goals themselves? No? Okay. Great. Next, we're going to move on to the superintendent goals and standards. The standards were discussed tonight at our work session, but I want to turn it over to Dr. Stanley for any explanation or discussion for the goals themselves and the standards before. Any comments from the board?
So goals are directly aligned with our work related to the strategic plan and the 5 different strategic plan areas, whether it's strategic plan A, academic achievement, B, focused on our work around equity, C, focused around our work around student mental health and the whole child, D, leadership, and then E, engagement. And so each one of those goals is related to those areas. Really, the focus this year was to go more deeply with the work that we started last year. So that is our comprehensive literacy plan that is really beginning to deeply roll out our equity plan that was approved by the board in December. That is to hone in and focus on the additional learning that we know needs to happen for students, particularly in mathematics, and then that is really honing in and focusing on culture and climate, specifically for teacher, staff, actually all staff wellness as well as student wellness. The goals are directly aligned with the MSBA superintendent framework for excellence and, again, with our strategic plan.
Thank you, Dr. Stanley. And then in July, we approved a new superintendent evaluation process that included standards to evaluate the superintendent by, basically to reduce any ambiguity that was in the current process where someone's excellent could be someone else's needs improvement. So there are new standards built into this process to help guide the board and Dr. Stanley. So those 2 documents are being put together to create this new goal and standard document. So I just wanted to explain that to the community and then turn it over to the board for any comments about these documents before they come for approval next month.
I was just going to say one housekeeping thing that came up in the work session. The document that is in the packet tonight, the actual standards are actually at the bottom. There's the development process underneath the existing goal, but the actual details of the standards are actually further down on the page. That was missed earlier, so I just want to make sure people knew that.
Thank you. Julie?
Yep. And the only other thing I wanted to add in is that we talked about in the work session about the goals is to, in a year from now, the board is committed to just evaluating the evaluation process, to do a check-in to make sure that we are on track and this is working for, with best practices for both the board and Dr. Stanley. So that's it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Great. Both of these will be up for action in the September board meeting. Now we're going to move on to our action items. Do I have a motion to approve the EPS calendar for 2024, 25, and 2025, 26
So
school
moved.
years? Sorry.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome Dr. Smazel and Dr. Saylor, or Director Saylor up. Welcome.
Good evening, Superintendent Stanley, Chair Allenberg, board members, and the new re-esteemed David Goldstein rejoining the board. We are so excited, and our community. And also my new partner in the calendar committee, Sonia Saylor. So excited to do this with you. We just have one brief update on the guiding change document, and that is that receiving the discussion feedback the last time we were with the board on this topic, we've added that second year. So what we will be bringing back to the board will be a new 2-year calendar for 2024-25 and 2025-26. That new two-year calendar will be much more detailed in 24-25, and then as detailed as we're able to make it for 25-26, with some of the things that might affect that calendar not quite known at this point, but we can still plan and create a framework for that. And then our hope is that with the action from the board, our committee is able to start right away and then to be able to meet our timeline to bring this back with a proposal at our September 19th board meeting.
Do board members have comments or questions? I just had one comment, and I'm not sure if the guiding change document would be an appropriate place to put verbiage, but I feel like the calendar is one place that as a board and district that we can take into consideration teacher mental health and the long-term stability of our teacher workforce. And if there's anything from like a professional workforce day or day-to-day, if we see that our calendar over time, that we need to add days, I just didn't know if that needs to be, if something like that should be added in, that our calendar could change, or it's just a concern of mine given what we're seeing as levels of teacher stress. And I feel it's like something that we should just keep top of mind, that is a lever that we have. So I just wanted to add that in. But like I said, I don't know if it would be something that should be written into the guiding change document or something that is more worked into our teacher contract, so.
Would you see that more under an unacceptable means, to have something written in there about, I don't know how you would do that. I was just trying to think of where
Right.
I would put that. And maybe it would be more in context and reality,
Right.
just to say that this is something that the district and the board are aware of and
Right.
open to making intentional decisions
Yeah.
around that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
I'm
it'd
just
be
trying
a
to think of where.
great addition to the context and reality. Like this is our current state for, and again, the calendar impacts all of our employee groups, but you know, the teachers have kind of a different role in school. And of course, we want a calendar that best honors and supports the mental health of our teachers so that they can be the best for kids. But maybe a good place to put that would be just describing our current context.
I'd support that.
Can I just add in, I think that, I know one of the superintendent goals is to look at educator stress and educator mental health. So I would just caveat that with, if that is part of what the recommendations are, or if that's part of what we're seeing, that becomes part of that work also. You know, it's not a one-off, it's a bigger conversation, so, okay.
That's all I had. Anything else? No? Okay, we will now vote to approve the Edina Public Schools calendar for 2024, I can't say all those twos together, 24, 25, and 25, 26 school years. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The Edina guiding change document is approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion to approve the Edina High School travel-based learnings for social studies?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Come on up.
You're just in time.
It's a good thing you got here just in time.
This on. All right, thank you. Good evening, Superintendent Stanley, Chair Allenberg, board directors, community members, and colleagues. In 2019, we had a travel-based experience to Vietnam approved by the school board, and since then, there has been a pause on that experience because of varying circumstances. We are now here with the goal in mind that we want to continue to provide a travel experience for that group of students that are still with us. And our Edina High School team has worked really hard to continue to communicate with parents, evaluate safety throughout the last couple of years, and ensure that we are able to stay focused on the travel-based experience. So I'm going to turn it over to our assistant principal, not superintendent, but principal. And Jen Carter to talk a little bit more about the options and the place that we're currently at with the travel-based experience for Vietnam. It's gotten a little bit complicated, but we're happy to be here today to walk it through with you, and we're excited. And Chris Griggs is also here today as the teacher who has been engaged and able to talk to us about the standards and the actual learning that the students can participate in on the trip. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Board and Dr. Stanley. Several times throughout the pandemic, this opportunity has been put on pause. So our intention was to travel in July of 2020. Since then, we have continued to monitor the situation, obviously throughout the world, and provide the students with the best and safest opportunity. This spring, international travel continued to start to open up throughout the world, and so we continue to monitor and work with our vendor, EF, which is stands for International, oh my gosh. Education for Tours, thank you. Wow. Ooh. And EF started to continue to offer opportunities. We have had back and forth with EF for several months. At this point, it does look like they can provide us with an opportunity. We came to the work session a few weeks ago, and since then, there's been other changes that have come forward. So right now, we're looking at travel dates of December 27th to January 5th. We have 16 students that are still enrolled in the opportunity. Our primary opportunity would be to go to Vietnam. We received word on Thursday there is a possibility that within the next 2 weeks, the travel company will be able to let us know if they could provide that opportunity to Vietnam. If we cannot travel to Vietnam, we are seeking your approval to pick an alternate destination, to be able to pivot the standards that Chris can speak to be able to provide this learning opportunity for students. We have, with the agreement with the company, we have this 110-day deadline, and that 110 days is September 8th. When we give that 110-day deadline, we tell them that we have the intent to travel. At that point, EF will come back to us and let us know what viable option exists, which is why the reason that we have all of the different itineraries that we've put forward. They asked us to have an alternate and then a secondary option if we could not go with the first option.
So our ask tonight, as Assistant Principal Carter mentioned, is that we have, Vietnam has been approved. So the ask is that we look at the 2 alternate trip itineraries and have approval for those so that we are prepared on September 8th to then move forward in one of 3 directions. And we would be coming back to the board in September with an update on what the final itinerary was decided upon and how the next steps are moving forward. So let's go ahead and turn it over for questions. And again, reiterating that Chris is here to answer questions about any academic pieces and standards and has had the experience of traveling with students on various trips. So.
Would this trip run the same time as the Vietnam trip and be similar cost?
The cost is actually for, the other options are in Europe, which are a little bit cheaper. And so families would be refunded the difference. So they're in the lower, I think the initial investment was around $4,000 per family. Almost all of the families are paid in full at this point, and so they would receive a refund.
And is it the same time?
It would be the same
Okay.
time, yes.
Thanks. Karen? Oh, yeah.
Can you remind us again, you have communicated with families throughout the process, and you talked to them in the spring, do I remember that correctly, about some options? And so if you would need to pivot to some of these other options, you're feeling pretty comfortable that those families would be fully aware that that would be a possibility and probably on board with this change?
We surveyed 19 families at that point. We started with over 30 students on this opportunity, and we surveyed families this spring. And of the 19 families, we heard back from 11 that they would be fine with pivoting to another location, and others wanted us actually to try to travel this summer, but we weren't comfortable with that in the state of the pandemic.
Julie?
Yeah, I just wanted to get clarification. So this recommendation is for the students that are already in the program, that no additional students could join the trip. Is that correct? Or is there?
Yes, in talking about that through TML Board Committee and the last meeting, we do want to be cognizant of how challenging it would be for families to add this trip with this cost at this time. So we are, yes, the recommendation is to go forward with the current students.
Okay.
That we're planning on going in 2020, approved in 2019.
Excellent, okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question also, a little bit to that point? Is there a minimum number of students that need to still be on board for the trip to run?
Again, that will depend on the itineraries. When I had a conversation last week, as we spoke about Europe or Vietnam, 15 was kind of the magical number in terms of, making sure that we have enough chaperones, but to be able to provide the opportunity. The EF doesn't want to come back to us and tell us they can't give us the best opportunity for students. So that, is down the list and maybe possibility D, but we're just trying to really stay focused on providing this opportunity in a safe manner for students.
And also, what would the timeframe, just can you clarify for us, what would this timeline look like for families? So tonight, approval happens for ABC trip, whatever trip happens. What does the communication look like to families, and what's our ask of them in timing to commit?
Well, they've already financially committed. So if a family was to not be interested in the alternate destination, or if they wanted not for their child to participate, they would be able to receive a voucher for their initial investment. Or they could get a cash refund minus $500. So that is the policy that EF has in place right now. I think, would monitor the situation, obviously knowing as of last Thursday that Vietnam could be a possibility. That's kind of changed, been a game changer, because neither Chris or I thought that was a possibility. So I think that we would actively monitor and closer to September 1st make that final decision about an itinerary, giving us time to be able to speak with our stakeholders as well as the board to ensure that we've had the best decision for this group.
Okay, so you would commit to that 110 days?
Yep.
That's what families would need. Okay, thank you.
And Chris did send an email last week.
Yes.
With an update, and then another email with an update.
Yeah, I communicate with them pretty frequently. I would say, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of which families are going to stay on board at this point. I mean, obviously, things can change, and that's okay. But the ones that have stuck with us this long, they're motivated. They want to go, and they'd love to go to Vietnam, but if it doesn't happen or it can't happen, they understand that. And we've all kind of made our peace with that kind of a while ago, that it's possible that Vietnam might not happen and we may have to go somewhere else. And I think that the families that are still on board with us at this point are okay with that.
Thanks for the information. If the board did not approve the trip, what would happen to people's investments in it?
At this point, we would need to push back the travel dates. This is the difficult part of having a school-sanctioned, board-approved trip, is you are entering into an agreement with an outside vendor. And so that has been our intention throughout this entire time, to be able to try to protect the investment of those families.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All those in favor of approving the Edina High School travel-based learning for social studies, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The travel-based learning is approved. So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I know. Do I have a motion to approve policies 410, 413, 415, 506, 514, 522, 524, 616, 634, 708, and 806?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll turn over to Director Green.
Thank you, Chair Allenberg. Before we get started on these policies, we have 11 that we are going to be moving for action tonight. I'm going to invite up Director Smazel and Director Monses Daly and Director Saylor to come up. We're trying to be efficient as we pop around these policies. So we're going to go one by one. We're going to start and do some follow-up also from our discussion that we had last month. So first up is policy 410, which is leaves, family, and medical leave, basically FMLA. And there was a question regarding health insurance. So Dr. Saylor, could you respond to that question?
Yes, I would be happy to. Thank you. So my understanding is this question specifically was related to Section 4C and whether an employer was required to continue an employee's health insurance in the same manner as if the employer was working, if the employee qualified for the up to 26 work weeks of the military caregiver leave provided by the FMLA. And the answer is yes. So any of the reasons that qualify under FMLA, the employer is required to continue insurance in the same way they would have had the employee been working. But I think I understand why the question came up, because of the way that we sectioned it out with FMLA, then Minnesota parenting leave law, and then we just had a section on the military caregiver leave. But the last sentence of that section, which refers the reader back to Section 4A, was meant to convey to the reader that, yes, FMLA would follow again, where the employer would be required to provide health insurance during that time period. So I believe that was the question on, specifically on 410.
Do board members have any other questions regarding this policy?
I don't. That was my question, so thank you.
Okay, great. We'll move on. So policy number 413, you're going to stay right there, right? It's harassment and violence prohibition, students and employees. And this was a question related to how this policy different with a mention of location for students from policy 506.
Correct, thank you. So my understanding is there was a question as to where policy 506, which is directly related to student misconduct, lists locations where that student misconduct can occur. 413 doesn't actually list locations. And the difference, there are a few differences, but 413 specifically relates to harassment and violence based on protected class. And it also relates to both employees and students, unlike 506, which just relates to students. And so under 413, because it does apply this more narrow focus on harassment and violence, the school district, as part of its investigation, actually determines whether the conduct constitutes a violation of the policy, and part of that factual determination is the location. So there isn't the same there isn't the same need to list locations, and in fact, you could actually, I mean, this could occur on property, school property, this could occur off school property, depending on the circumstances, so it becomes a factual determination as a part of the investigation.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was say, do any board members have any additional questions or follow-up?
So just to clarify, 413, as you just described, is whether location in terms of on or off covers that. In 506, there might be other parameters that it's going to be focusing on, especially because it's really focused on students.
Right.
Got it.
And I 506, of course, is part of the student handbook, and I think it just makes, I'm sure they think it makes very good sense to tell students exactly where this could apply. Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, no further questions. We'll move on. Policy 415, reported suspected maltreatment of a minor or a vulnerable adult. We didn't have much discussion or questions on this one. Anything else pop up for any board members? Okay, great. So that's good. And then we'll move on to policy 506, student conduct and discipline. I want to note in here that policy 506, as you recall, is one of our policies that we review on an annual basis, which means the work on this policy is on a continuum. Changes to this policy being considered tonight by the board included feedback received in many forms from stakeholders, students, community members, staff, MSBA review for best practice and legal counsel, in addition to Superintendent Stanley's guidance and leadership and site-level administrators. There are two substantial changes to Policy 506 that I think it's really important we all take note. One is the addition of, in the appendix, number 35, threatening and/or disruptive behavior. And this specifically reads, racism, religious-based discrimination, xenophobia, sexual orientation, and gender identity discrimination, student misconduct based on race, religion, country of origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity that includes, but is not limited to, inappropriate and harmful comments, slurs, jokes, pictures, objects, threats, and/or intimidation. And that was added into the addendix, or the appendix. I'm going to keep saying that wrong. The second thing that is another important change is that we've also added in the student services referral as part of the discipline plan in all cases to allow for education, understanding, and learning. And as in all policies, but in particularly this one, it's important to note that implementation of this policy falls under school district operations, and it is used as a resource for the student handbook and for site leaders so they can best manage student behavior, conduct, and discipline, and expectations. A note to make on this policy is that the school dress code policy language is updated to reflect the most recent changes that the board approved in recent years, but the changes here are consistent with just policy crossover, so there's nothing new that we're looking at. So I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Smazel for a little bit more background.
Thank you, Director Green. Very thorough, so I don't have a lot to add, but maybe just a couple of things. So Policy 506 being renewed annually does inform the student handbook, as Director Green had mentioned, and specifically we added a little bit more detail in the handbook in the preamble ahead of the what is in the appendix in 506 is really the discipline guidelines in the handbook. And so a little bit of that preamble helps define some of the words that are in that discipline guideline, like words like racism and religious-based discrimination, xenophobia, sexual orientation, gender identity. There's some new definitions that are in that preamble. So it helps assist families and students in their understanding of what specifically we are talking. Let's get really clear about what we're talking about. And another section that was added in the handbook was this an expectation, a clarity around the expectation that that families do review it with their child, that's an important part of the family conversations as we go back to school. We did have a discussion and a great suggestion from one of our amazing students sitting behind me that we had some increased clarity to make sure that when forms are submitted, so that people, if something happens, they're able to go out and complete a form that's on the website and they're able to submit that, and it's a reporting form. So we want to make sure that that goes to that administrator and that's super clear, and so that's it's set up to be automatic in how communications has prepared that form, which is excellent. And then the other part that we added that goes beyond 506 into the handbook is that little bit about interventions to help students and families understand that discipline is both punitive and an educational opportunity. And so we want to be really clear that there are consequences to actions when there are discipline issues in schools, but it also is an opportunity to educate so that we don't continue to create those same issues. And so we wanted to spell out a little bit in the handbook the types of opportunities that we take advantage of to educate in those moments and in those times. So a little bit more detail in the handbook to help maybe give some guidance to those conversations that can happen with families to prepare for school, but definitely its base comes from Policy 506.
Thank you. Do board members have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to voice my gratitude for the work that was done on this policy. So thank you.
I'm just going to add in my opinions, so I'm taking my board chair hat off for a moment, but I am in full support of this policy tonight. I think passing this language and passing this policy is really important for our students, and it's really important for our community. And I think part of that is it's the start of the new year, but I really think that this work that we're doing helps to ensure change and progress. So I'm super proud to vote for it tonight. I believe our board and district have a steadfast commitment to our strategic plan. And we say we're working to ensure that we have an equitable and inclusive culture. And I think tonight's vote is part of that important work, and it will continue and it will keep going. So I just wanted to say that. So, any other questions about this policy? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Randy, stay right there. Policy 514 is bullying. Does anyone have any, we had no questions or discussion on this. It aligns with, no. Okay. Okay, I think we're good there. Policy 522, Title IX, non-discrimination policy, grievance procedure and process. Any questions? Great. Policy 524, internet acceptable use and safety policy. We did have a request to add in a line for parent signature, right, into the policy,
Which is in there?
the 524.
Yes.
Yeah. And that was done, so I didn't know if anyone had any additional questions on that. That was just announcing
now.
what we
I'm with you
did
now. I'm
between
following the
last month
flow.
and this month. No other questions? Okay. Policy 616, school district system accountability. No? No questions? Great. Policy 634, electronic technologies acceptable use. This is one where we did add in some language to include recording without permission. Does any board members have any additional feedback on that or thoughts? Okay. Policy 708, expense reimbursement. There's slight change for improved operational and financial efficiency. No, no questions? Great. And policy 806, emergency management. This is another one that comes up for annual review. Does anyone have any questions on this one? No. Wow. Great. Chair Allenberg is gone.
I've got it.
Oh, great.
We will now vote to approve policies 410, 413, 415, 506, 514, 522, 524, 616, 634, 708, and 806. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Policies 410, 413, 415, 506, 514, 522, 524, 616, 634, 708, and 806 are approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Shaw.
Moving on to board leadership and committee updates. The only update that Board Chair Allenberg had was that the filing period for the school board seat that will be voted on in November closes at 5 p.m. on the 16th of August. Are there any superintendent updates?
One of the updates that I have is related to the Minnesota School Sports High School League. I always mess MSHSL up. One of the things I wanted to talk about is MSHSL is actually doing quite a bit of work to make certain that students who are involved in sports are playing in safe spaces. It was all over the news last year that some students were experiencing racist and xenophobic as well as harassment related to LGBTQ. And so they have actually formed a work group of, they hope to have 100 students. Right now they have 65 students. We have 2 students from Edina Public Schools that are involved in that work group. I just connected with Troy today, and he's going to look to see if we can add more. Initially, every district could only have 2 students, and so now they're saying that we can add additional students. What I'm really excited about this work is that it is student voice driven. This is not just about what the adults are thinking, what the coaches are thinking, but this is about the voice of students and them expressing the impact that it has on them. And so there are some, out of that, there's some work that Lake Conference is doing as well. And superintendents, as many of us that can meet possible next week on the 17th, we're going to be meeting to talk about that as well. Again, to make certain that our students are safe and they have that both physical and psychological safety.
Great. Well, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.